Richard, one of the characteristics of many religions is at our death or after our death, there is some sort of judgment. Do you believe in such a judgment?
I believe that after our death, we are God judges us. I don't know whether it occurs immediately after our death or whether it occurs to everybody at once, but certainly I think we have to answer for the life we have been given to our Creator, who has made this gift to us. And our Creator will judge us on the basis of what we have made of that life.
Well, one of the arguments against Judeo-Christian religions, particularly Christianity, is the existence of hell, where some, maybe not many, will be consigned to at least what traditionally seems to be an everlasting punishment for what is certainly a very finite number of decades.
Yes.
Is this the act of an all-good God?
I don't think it's best regarded as a punishment. If I can take you back a stage or two, in our life, all the time, we have to choose between doing good and doing evil. And it's a characteristic of human beings, unlike other possible rational creatures, that each time we do a good act, it's easier to do a good act of that time next time. Each time we do a bad act, it's easier to do a bad act of that kind next time. So gradually people form their character over life. Everybody can observe this psychologically. People's characters get harder and harder. Clearly what God hopes is that we will become more naturally good people.
You called it stickiness.
Stickiness, yeah, that's
like
right.
That.
It gets that way. But of course, it's possible that every time somebody chooses, or most of the time somebody chooses, they choose the bad. Now, choosing the bad is not quite symmetrical to choosing the good, because the good motivates. That's to say, if you recognize something as good, then that leads you to do it. But if you refuse to do it each time, you yield, you don't deliberately choose the bad, you yield to the bad inclinations. And as you yield more and more to the bad inclinations, so you become more and more insensitive to the good. So what is clearly possible is that somebody can totally rule out themselves as insensitive to the good. Solzhenitsyn has an interesting chapter in the Gulag Archipelago about the concentration camp guards. And he says you can suddenly see, with respect to some of them, a flip. Up to a time, they've got a bit of compassion left for their victims. After that, they couldn't care less about anything, in virtue of its moral characteristics. So what would a good God do with somebody who had totally annihilated his sensitivity to the moral? Well, he could impose a sensitivity on them, but that would mean that, as it were, what they had intentionally allowed themselves to be, he was not allowing them to be. He was saying, well, you've got a lot of choices, but if you choose the bad, I will overrule you. And that means that really they are not being allowed a choice of forming their own character.
What about that guard himself? He was placed in that circumstance. He might have had his character hardened by the circumstance, but if he were not placed in that situation, if he were placed in some nice church, maybe he would have been a different person.
He's made choices. The point I'm making is if he made these choices in this situation, he has become a different sort of person. If certain other things had happened, then I think he would not have formed a character either for good or bad, and he comes in an intermediate situation in which he's allowed a further choice. But he has been put in a situation where he has an ultimate choice. Not everybody is in that situation in this earth. But if they are given this ultimate choice and they do choose the bad, the question is, what would a God do with it? And of course, it's not just choosing the bad once, it's choosing the bad over a whole life of circumstances. Well, if God imposed a character on him, then God would be saying to all of us, whatever you choose, in the end, it's not going to make any difference because I'm going to make you a certain sort of person. And that is not giving us the ultimate freedom of what we are to be. So he has reason to allow the God to maintain his bad character. But what he will surely not do is allow the God in the afterlife to have lots of prisoners on which to continue to impose his bad habits. So in the afterlife, if the God is preserved till the afterlife, he will have inclinations to do all sorts of hurt, and yet nobody to do all that sort of hurt too. And so inevitably he is going to be an unhappy person, because happiness consists in doing what you want to do, and he will not be doing what he wants to do. So inevitably he's going to be an unhappy person through his own choice. And if God were to overrule that, then God would have made his choice for him. So I don't think, and hell is just being unhappy. I mean, fires are just a metaphorical description of the situation. If I'm inclined to think that were the God, as it were, to think that non-existence was better than the existence of unhappiness in being unable to hurt people, then perhaps God would eliminate him. That seems reasonable enough. But what is central to the doctrine of Christianity and some other religions is that in our life we often have ultimate choices of the sort of person we are to be, which affects our eternal destiny. And whether we are separate, united with God or separated from him. And if separation could involve many forms, it could involve annihilation if the person wanted that, or it could involve suffering but yet having the great benefit of existence. It could involve many forms.
But fundamental to your assumption is that the character of the person is impossible to change. You can't, if you have a possibility of change, it does not seem compatible with an all-good God. You must assume impossibility of change.
Wait a minute. God clearly could impose a character on the person.
No, we agree that we're not doing that.
But if the person has made himself such that he is totally insensitive to the good, then he clearly can't change, because the goodness of an action he doesn't see as a reason for doing it. The only thing he sees as a reason for doing it is what he wants to do, and what he wants to do is to hurt people.
However you define it, you must assume that it is a permanent and irrevocably so.
Well, it will be so if he has annihilated his sensitivity to the good. If he hasn't altogether done that, then of course I don't want to say that he is permanently barred from God.
It may be that people who have done the absolute worst things have thought in their mind, however distorted, that they were actually having to do some bad in order for some greater good. Maybe Hitler thought by killing the Jews it would enrich the purity of Germany, and Germany could enrich the world, and at the end of the day it was better for the world if this were the case.
Well, if he really thought that, then in that case he's not made himself irrevocably bad. But even if he said those words which you have just uttered, the question is whether the good would have any connection with what we mean by good.
And maybe it wouldn't. But
in that case, as it were, he's lost his sensitivity to goodness in our sense of goodness, because all children, apart from one or two odd mentally deranged cases, have an initial sensitivity to the good. All children want to love, want to be loved, they have other inclinations as well, but they've got a sensitivity. They're open to moral education. And if they reject that constantly through life in such a way that they've lost that sensitivity, then it's through their own choice. And then
there are many other categories. We have babies who were born for a day and then die. We have billions of people who existed without knowledge of good or evil. We've had people who are mentally deficient. I mean, there's many different kinds of categories other than people who have been good and people who are irrevocably
That is true, and certainly as far as Christianity is concerned, it is not a doctrine of the Church that anybody is in hell. It's all of the doctrine is that there is this possibility for you. Maybe nobody avails themselves of this possibility, but it exists, and it's something we should fight against. But there are these enormous numbers of intermediate categories, you're quite right. And I speak only of Christianity, but Christianity has allowed for sort of intermediate categories of thought. There is, for example, the doctrine of purgatory in the Catholic Church, which says that people who've chosen on balance the good in life are to be given an infinite time in which to finalize their conviction, their dedication to the good.
What about a morally good Buddhist or follower of Hinduism? Will that person be in the Christian heaven?
Well, anyone sensitive to the good is a candidate for the Christian heaven, but they have to have in order to finally get there, they need true beliefs about what goodness consists in. And I think Buddhism is rather deficient in this respect, because it's a Buddhist creed that one should eliminate one's desires, one's inclinations, whereas it's rather central to Christianity that one should cultivate the good desires and eliminate only the bad desires. And as I pointed out, happiness consists in doing what you want to, in other words, what you desire to. But if you've eliminated your desires, you haven't any hope of this. So the Buddhist does need a little bit of education in love for other people as a natural desire, being a good thing, compassion in the sense of feeling for the suffering and so on, and in the sense of it's a good thing to have a certain amount of anger at injustice. All of these are regarded as good things by Christianity, but the ideal Buddhist eliminates. So although he may have seen many good things and acted on them, and for that reason is clearly on the route, he needs a little bit of education to get there.
And this might be done post-mortem?
It might be done post-mortem.
Well, let's hope so.
I hope so too. So in summary, God gives us choices. God gives us the biggest choice of all between gradually forming a good character, which will mean being naturally inclined to do the good, and also seeking out true views about what is good, and so making ourselves more having the right inclinations, or allowing ourselves to completely damage our character so that it's not sensitive to the good, or we may not complete the process, in which case we have to go through some further intermediate period. But if God didn't give us this ultimate choice, he would have prejudiced. He would have said, I can't trust you with yourself. And that, I think, is not necessarily a good thing.